Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, MedTech Regulatory Submissions Made Easy, hosted by Rook Quality Systems and QuickVault by Veeva. My name is Tory Lopez, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are thrilled to have you join us as we dive into 5 common medical device regulatory submissions and give you strategies for a successful submission and timely entry to market. We are also very excited to show you a live demo of QuickVault's new submission module of its software that streamlines submission preparation and post-submission interactions with regulatory authorities. So before we get started, let's go over just a couple of quick housekeeping items. So the first is the webinar recording, the slide deck, the session summary, and the Q&A recap will be emailed to all registrants within 24 hours after today's presentation. And then the second thing is if you have any questions during the presentation, please drop those in the Q&A chat, and we will address those during the Q&A session at the end. All right, so we have an excellent lineup of speakers today. So first up, as you see on the screen, is Jeff Hau, Senior Director of Product Management at QuickVault by Veeva. And I will hand this off to them to give a little bit more of an in-depth introduction of themselves. But there's Jeff. We have Axel Strombergsson, VP of Strategy at QuickVault by Veeva, and Kyle Rose, founder and CEO of Rook Quality Systems. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I will hand it over to you, Jeff, to kick off those more in-depth speaker introductions.
Perfect. Thanks, Terry. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Hau. I head up product for QuickVault. I've been at Veeva for over 3.5 years now, and over the time taking QuickVault for just the idea to the product where it is today. I've been doing software product management for many years now. Prior to Veeva, I was at Amazon. I've also been part of 2 successful startups, one to an IPO, one to an acquisition, and then based in Toronto, Canada, as Tory mentioned. Really looking forward to showing you all what QuickVault's all about, as well as a sneak peek at our new regulatory submissions functionality. Over to you, Axel.
Thank you, Jeff. Hey, everyone. My name is Axel Strombergsson. I'm the Vice President for the QuickVault product that we're going to show at the end of this webinar today. I've been with Veeva Systems for about 3 years, and prior to that, I was in the MedTech space for over 20 years, primarily with a few number of startups. Started off in engineering, led R&D for a surgical device company based out of Sweden. It took me here 14 years ago. But later in my career, I focused more on device commercialization and operations. In aggregate, I've been hands-on involved in 6 different startups. So some of what we talk about here today has been something I experienced a few times firsthand. In addition to that, I spent a few years at Vanderbilt University in Nashville at the Tech Transfer Office, where I supported research teams on a medical center and engineering school in their pursuit of research of medical devices. In addition to that, very active as a startup mentor within different incubators and accelerators, both here in the US and Europe. As an example, right now, we are the sponsor of MedTech Innovator. So there we are highly engaged, both as startup judges and providing mentorship and lectures and guidance of sorts. Next slide, please. Veeva, that Jeff and I work for, we are the world's largest provider of software solutions to the medtech industry. Right now, as a whole, as a company, we are north of 7,000 employees, about $3 billion in revenue. If we look at our MedTech division and on the enterprise side of things, we have 19 of the top 20 largest companies as our customers. You see some of the logos here: Medtronic, BD Baxter, Intuitive Surgical, and others. So if you're a medical device startup company in the audience here today, it's likely that your future acquirer is one of our customers. These bigger companies, they're using our enterprise solutions that we have on what we call the Vault platform. But the QuickVault product that we're going to show you here today is what we have for the lower end of the market, so small to medium-sized medical device companies. So next slide, please. And QuickVault is what we call the device to market platform. So in its foundation is an eQMS, but more of a cross-functional platform to not only support pre-commercial activities, but also help our customers with their growth once in commercial distribution and beyond. To the left here, you see some of our functional areas. Of course, the standard functionality of an eQMS around dock control and change control, quality events, training. But to that end too, we have full automation around design control. So you can manage design and development of a medical device completely within the system, including the built-in risk management functionality for that. Right now, we also have supplier management in here. And what we are launching next year, which we are demoing today, is what's underlined here, our regulatory submission preparation and submission tracking. What that's going to give us is a full platform where you go from soup to nuts when it comes to starting the formal development of a medical device and get through the submission all the way up to clearance or approval. In addition to that, we're also launching equipment management later this year, so asset management, if you will, calibration and maintenance of equipment to kind of give it that all-encompassing collaboration platform to support long-term success for our customers. Next slide, please. On a high level, QuickVault, if you look at what it is outside of pure functionality, we are day one ready, meaning that we don't need to have any implementation costs or implementation projects. We can do that because we are fully validated on our end. So once you get up and for you to get up and running, there's literally no effort on your side. And that's what's also brand this as an easy solution to get up and running. We are built specifically for the medical device industry, so of course compliant with all the regulations and standards in the major markets. In addition to that, we provide value to our customers in multiple ways, but we also provide a library of resources. So QMS documentation package is included for free to our customers to build that industry best practices QMS, if you will. Something else that we do really well, I think, at Veeva is our continuous improvement that we have over here, meaning that we invest heavily in R&D, both on the enterprise solution products that I showed you that the bigger companies use, but also the same goes for QuickVault, where we continue to improve the product and launch new functionality. And we do that without changing the price for our customers, which is really neat. So with what we have coming up next year with the regulatory submission module, our customers today will get that included on the platform without the change of the price here in a couple of months. Lastly, on the budget side of things, we do offer flexible subscriptions. So we have month-to-month subscription model with also the opportunity to pay with a credit card. That's it for me for right now, Cal. I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Axel and Jeff, for the intro. And thanks, QuickVault, for hosting this webinar with Rook. So I'm Kyle Rose. I'm CEO and founder of Rook Quality Systems. Rook Quality is a consulting company I started over 13 years ago now, so 2012. We have a team of over 40 consultants that work with all types of medical device companies, helping them with their quality and regulatory consulting needs. Everything from early stage academic companies with 1 to 2 people, all the way to Fortune 500 companies, supporting all types of devices, including software, diagnostics, mechanical, electrical devices, a little bit of everything. We also are very hands-on with, early stage incubators, accelerators, universities, and groups like this, really to encourage new devices to get to market, make sure they have all the resources and guidance they need to get their novel technology to market. So highlighting some of the clients with the Rook team here, as well as our partnership with QuickVault Veeva. Today's topic, just a high-level review of the agenda. So we have diving into regulatory submissions, so an intro and discussion on different types of regulatory submissions, both for the US and the EU market. We'll have Axel taking over on the FDA pre-submission, what, why, when, and how to do that process and start your FDA pre-submission. And then we'll send it back to Jeff for a demo of the regulatory tool in QuickVault Veeva, and then we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. If we see some questions that are kind of on topic during the webinar, we'll try to address some of those as well. But we do have that time at the end to discuss questions and anything that we can also follow up with after this webinar as well. So diving into FDA submissions, we're going to start with what is, the most common and most typical type of submission. This is the FDA 510(k) submission. So the FDA 510(k) is a traditional submission that goes for most Class 2 devices, and in some cases, some Class 1 devices. Within the scope of the FDA, they classify devices based on risk, Class 1 being lowest risk, Class 2 being medium risk, and Class 3 being highest risk. So the majority of the medium risk products are in this Class 2, and the majority of these will need a 510(k) before you can start to sell and market your product. For Class 1 devices, there's typically not a submission required, so you are able to start selling your device once you've registered with the FDA. In a lot of cases, you do not need or require a regulatory submission prior to selling that product. But for Class 2 and Class 3, you do need to submit this information to the FDA before you can start selling your product. And that's where our team comes in. We help a lot of companies filing their submission, both US companies that are developing new technology or established companies that need additional support for their 510(k). We also help a lot of international companies that have products in EU, Asia, South America that are looking to get into the US. We help them with their 510(k) quite a bit as well. Just a high-level overview on the content of your 510(k). So within this, there's a few different sections. All of these documents and records will be submitted to the FDA electronically through the eStar program. So this is something that's a much improved process over a few years ago when you had to print out documents and submit those to the FDA. The eStar makes the submission process much easier, much more efficient for submitting your 510(k). High level, we have some administrative information. So there's some specific forms the FDA has that they want you to complete, outlining the company, the type of device, the standards, things like that you use. Within this administrative information, there's also a small business designation. This is one thing that we highly recommend for the majority of our clients. So within the scope of the FDA, if you make less than, I think it's 200 million per year, you're considered a small business. And that helps you reduce the fee of your 510(k) from around 24,000 to around 6,000. So these fees change every year, but that's the current fee for 2025. So if you are a small business with that under 200 million per year revenue, you definitely want to take advantage of this small business designation. Get that submitted. It takes a few weeks, and we can help with that process as well, but that really helps reduce the cost of your 510(k). Next section is the device description. So this is outlining the intended use and the technological characteristics of your device. The key area that really is useful in the 510(k) is your predicate device comparison. So within the scope of a 510(k), we're identifying a predicate device that has a similar features or similar use as your product, and then comparing our device to it. That's the primary pathway of 510(k)s. There's also a safety and performance pathway, but the predicate pathway is still the most common pathway for the majority of 510(k)s. Next, we'll have some performance testing. So this is where you will include information around your bench testing. So any internal testing you've done for your device, any animal testing, any external testing. So any of your like biocompatibility, electrical safety, things like that, as well as any clinical testing. For 510(k)s, it's not always required that you do clinical testing, but for some devices like diagnostic devices, wearable monitoring devices, the majority of those will require clinical testing to be included with your 510(k). Sterilization and biocompatibility have their own section. Again, if this is only applicable to your device, if you have a software device, then it's likely you won't have sterilization or biocompatibility. With that, if you do have software, then you will have a whole section on software. One of the things that we talk about a little bit later on is that With software devices, the FDA looks at a lot of documentation throughout the development of your software. So it's very important if you are working on a software device currently that you've started your quality system, you've implemented the proper measures to track and document and test your software, because a lot of that information, if not all of it, will go into your FDA submission. So it's very important that you start that software documentation early in the process to make sure you're ready for your 510(k) when you get to that point. Labeling and instructions for use. These might seem like minor things, but these are the areas that have a lot of questions from the FDA, and also often a lot of responses as well. So you need to make sure that your labeling and instructions for use meet the FDA's guidelines, meet any external standards. There's actual standards that outline symbols and things like that for your IFU and labeling. So you really want to make sure you put time and strategy into your labeling and instructions for use. A summary of your safety and effectiveness. So this is kind of like a final conclusion showing how your device is as safe and effective as your predicate. And that kind of rounds out your 510(k). So quick overview, but this is all of the content that would go into your 510(k) if you are looking at this type of path. For the actual process, so we talked on the previous slide about identifying a predicate device. So this is a device that must have a similar intended use and technological characteristics. A lot of our job as a regulatory consultant working with our clients is to identify the best predicate for your device. So reviewing what devices are out there, we can search both on the FDA database, and you can search just via Google or something like that for 510(k) summaries. So whenever a 510(k) is cleared from the FDA, they will publish a summary of the testing, the intended use, the claims for that product. So that is very valuable information when you are trying to pick your predicate device. So it's important that you review and research those other types of devices in the market to use as your potential predicates. Within the scope of the 510(k) pathway, there's different types of 510(k). The traditional 510(k) is, as it sounds, traditional and the most standard pathway for most devices. There are special 510(k)s for modifications to an already cleared 510(k) device. So if you're just changing your sterilization or part of your manufacturing, you can use a special 510(k) rather than a traditional. There's also abbreviated 510(k)s. These are based on the use of recognized consensus standards or guidance documents that can help speed up your process as long as you follow the requirements of those standards or those guidance documents. So these are different options. It's best to look and see which one meets your requirement and meets your type of submission before you start to fill out the forms and fill out the eStar copy. All right. As far as the actual process of submitting, so as I said earlier, we're using the eStar as of 2023 for all 510(k) submissions. The FDA has eStar templates that allow you to complete these and submit this documentation electronically. And it also allows you to see when your reviewer has been assigned, where you are at in the review process. So it's much more interactive process using eStar than it previously was. So much more information as to where you are and what you can expect in the next few days. So high-level FDA process, all the information you'll traditionally see online from the FDA and other resources says it's a 90-day timeline. We typically tell our clients it is 6 to 9 months. The reason for the difference really ties to this additional information. So when you initially submit, there's no longer a RTA process that was mostly eliminated with eStar. So there's an acceptance review just to check and make sure. The eStar really helps to weed out any of those. So it really streamlines that process. A majority of them are accepted in that first 15 days. Then it moves to the 60-day substantive review process. So this is where you actually have an assigned reviewer that's diving into all of your documentation, all your testing, all your final design outputs, and reviewing your submission and your comparison to your predicate device. If there's any questions, they will send over what's called an additional information request or an AI request. This opens up a 6-month or 180-day window for you to respond. If the questions are simple and say, hey, we want you to update your labeling to include this warning, you can turn those around pretty quickly. If they say, hey, we want you to do additional testing and it's going to take 2 months, then that's how it can extend your timeline from 90 days to 2 or 3 or 4 months addition, right? So it's really important that you plan. You don't just align and tell your investors and board and additional team that it's 90-day process when there is this window for additional 6 months. So best guess, we typically say 6 to 9 months, depending on the type of submission. Once you've cleared that 90-day total, so say you've submitted your AI request, that 90-day keeps counting. You will get either a substantially equivalent letter saying your device has a 510K and it's cleared for marking, or an NSE, which means you're not substantially equivalent, and you can either try to submit again if you need to do more testing, or go through a different path, either through de novo or PMA, which we'll talk about in more detail. Some of the best practices we've seen for submitting your 510K is to start the 510K planning as early as possible. So really outline what testing you need to do, what features are going to be in your first product or your MVP product that's going to go to submission, and plan well ahead so you're not trying to do testing the last minute before you're submitting your product, your 510K. Research predicate devices for everything they did, including all the testing, research their IFU, their packaging, any post-market feedback or complaints, because this will be useful information when you're preparing your submission. Software documentation requires a lot of the background information that was used during development, so make sure you're documenting that as you go. Cybersecurity and AI regulations are getting more and more difficult daily. So often the current guidances are out of date. So make sure you're reviewing, talking with your consulting group or your software development firm to make sure you have the latest information for what the FDA is looking for relative to cybersecurity and AI. Over-the-counter and at-home devices will likely require usability testing. So this is somewhat of a gray area, but for these buckets, we mostly see that it is required. So make sure you plan ahead to include usability in your testing. And then lastly, there's been a lot of changes, obviously, with FDA, reduction of staff, even more happening this morning. So it's really going to be harder to use justification or other negotiation with your 510K. So really making sure that you have a very strong argument, you did all the testing, and you submit that, because the whole process is going to get slower and more difficult as there's more reductions in FDA staff. All right, so next, from the 510K, we have the de novo classification. So this is a classification process for novel medical devices or technology that don't have a predicate, but could represent a low to moderate risk. So there is the class 3, which is the PMA. So these are the highest risk products. If you think you have a new technology that hasn't been used under a 510K, you can submit a de novo to hopefully get in that class 2 and create a new 510K product code and pathway for future devices in this space. So think of some of the first AI image analysis devices that get to the market. They had to go through this. We're working on a lot of the at-home diagnostics. A lot of those, the initial one has to go through a de novo first, and then other devices can use a 510K pathway after that for future predicate submissions. Key areas of the de novo. So we have a lot of the same information. The risk-benefit analysis is one of the key differences between a de novo to a 510K. And then we have this proposed special control. So that's really outlining what your device testing needs to be done for this new product code you're working with the FDA to create. Pre-submission is optional, but highly recommended for this de novo, and Axel will talk about the pre-submission process in more detail. Upon review of this a little bit longer, 150 days, you'll receive either a de novo classification or an NSE that you are not able to move forward. So approval, you're getting your de novo, or denial that you have to either go class 3 or the de novo plan you put in place and testing doesn't meet the FDA's requirements. Best practices for de novo is really plan to meet with the FDA likely multiple times to identify the best classification, the testing plan. If you need to do clinical, which is most likely, I would say, really wanting to define the clinical endpoints with the FDA prior to starting your study. Clinical studies are very expensive, so you don't want to start a study and then not be able to use it, right? So plan to use a quality and regulatory consultant to outline what's best for your product, including your claims and testing, and then have a strategic approach to meeting with the FDA. Breakthrough designation is also a good path if you're going de novo, because it gives you increased communication with the FDA, so a lot more hands-on and documentation and communication with the FDA. One thing we have seen for companies that choose to go de novo is that it can be a competitive advantage. So as a de novo, you are the first one going through. So you can make that path for any future devices up to your standard. So if you think it's key to have these tests that might be harder for some potential competitors to complete, you can include those in the de novo and really set yourself up for a longer use and being the only one in the market for a longer amount of time. De novos and PMAs too typically take multiple years. So this is products that have been in development for 3 to 10 years from the ones we've worked on. So it's important that you're making sure to update your design files and your testing with the latest revisions, because those things will get updated as well. So standards and requirements will update through the time that you're in R&D. So it's important to make sure you're updating your design files as you go. On to PMA. So PMA is the class 3, the highest risk type of submission for the FDA. This is for high risk devices that are, life-sustaining, life-supporting types of devices. So things like cochlear implants, pacemakers, heart valves, complex diagnostics, all of these things fall into that PMA product, the class 3. With this, there's a lot more review and documentation required just because of the higher risk profile. FDA wants to have additional assurance that your device is safe and effective because it is a higher risk, and failures could lead to much more severe adverse events. With this additional testing, so a broader suite of non-clinical testing with your bench testing, your animal testing, your biocompatibility, electrical safety, your software. There's different levels of software documentation as well. So most likely your software will be in the higher bucket and require additional software testing and software validation. Clinical studies are most likely required for all class 3s as well. So just planning that you're going to have to do clinical trials for your class 3. The FDA will actually do audits of your manufacturing facility and your quality system prior to this PMA submission or during this PMA review process. So actually having all of your quality system in place using something like QuickVault to store and maintain your quality system, your design controls, your risk management, all of this is critical throughout the PMA process. Post-market data, as far as like follow-up from your clinical trial, as well as your post-market surveillance plan, and then a high-level summary of the safety and effectiveness of your PMA device. Kind of pre-submission again, highly recommended for any PMA device, and likely that you'll do more than one. This process a little bit longer than 510(k) and de novo, so we have a 45-day acceptance. We have a substantive review, which is 180 days. FDA also does some kind of department reviews, so you can have different sections reviewed as you go. So reviewing kind of partial year testing, clinical testing, design as you go. So there's ways to split it up. But at this point, it's likely you've already had multiple conversations with the FDA. FDA decisions, so we have approval, not approval, and denial. So pretty straightforward as far as the different types of practices with the PMA device. Lastly, so that wraps up the US FDA pathways. There's also a CE mark, which is for EU. Currently, the regulations have updated to the EU MDR. This was published in 2017, but had a rollout over multiple years. Still some products that are actively transitioning to MDR. Again, CE mark is for the EU, not FDA, so it's 2 different regulatory organizations and 2 different approvals required. You do need an EU rep, so if you're a US-based company, you need an EU rep to sell your device in the EU, and this will be part of the process. Within the content of your CE mark, you have your device description. You have to do your quality management system auditing, so your ISO 13485 compliance and review of that. You have technical documentation, so your design and technical file, and then you have a clinical evaluation report that outlines the clinical investigations and literature review for your device, and then ongoing post-market activities as well. EU has a slightly different classification with 2A and 2B, and then class 1, 2, 3. So some slightly differences, as well as classification rules that outline the different types of technology and where those fall under the classification under CE mark. Within the scope of this process, you need to hire a notified body to do your review for your CE mark. You contract with this company and identify the timeline and process of submitting your information. They will come on site to do the quality system audits, and they'll have an external reviewer review your technical file and clinical evaluation report, similar to an FDA 510(k) review. Best practices for submitting a CE mark. So really being strategic to find a notified body that has the codes for your product and specializes in your type of technology, especially if you're working on some sort of software or wearable device or AI. You want to find a good notified body that fits with your product. Prepare for both on-site quality audits as well as off-site technical review. The kind of pre-submission process that Axel's talked about and I've mentioned, not really that scope for CE. So in some cases you can have meetings with notified bodies that advance, but a lot of times it's kind of documenting it and getting it reviewed as you go. Clinical evaluation reports and the post-market follow-up require significant resources. So hundreds of hours if you're doing it with a consultant or multiple people internal. So really plan for that as you're outlining both the financial obligations as well as the man hours required to build your CER and your post-market documentation. EU classification requirements, guidances, and harmonized standards are always being updated, and you must proactively ensure your device complies with those. So make sure you're very proactive in monitoring new standards and reviewing how your device compares with the latest revision of those standards. That's a wrap on FDA submissions and CE mark. We're going to pass it over to Axel now for FDA pre-submission process. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal. Make a quick transition here onto my side of things. Well, thanks everyone again for coming. This section, about 10 minutes here to focus on the very important topic of FDA pre-submission. So like Cal mentioned here in the beginning of this webinar, there's a lot of points in the journey towards the market where pre-submission makes sense and something that you really should consider and actually do. So what I have here is just covering highly or briefly the what, the why, when, and how for pre-submissions, and a little bit of a strategy and considerations for how to go about doing that. So starting with the what, something that FDA I think do a pretty good job about in general are their guidance documents. And here's the guidance document for what they call the Q-submission program. And part of the Q-submission program is where we have the pre-submission. And the pre-submission in general is that you provide in writing information about your device, the plan that you have to bring that through the FDA to the market, and for them to respond to this, to provide you early feedback to basically your plan of bringing your device through the FDA and into the market. So it is a written request, and the feedback that you will receive from the FDA is typically used to help guide your development because you will get their insights to the testing that you have planned, right? In a preclinical or clinical testing, what is the data of safety and effectiveness that you have planned to acquire, and for them to respond to that. It also helps you, of course, with subsequent application preparation, just like Carl mentioned, for a PMA to have. You typically need a few of these pre-subs to really make sure that you make that and do that in the right manner. And in general, you should receive feedback from the FDA within 75 to 90 days. And lastly, they don't charge anything for this. It's free for you to do. Sure, it might cost you a little bit if you need to work with a third party to put this in place, but you don't have to pay the FDA anything. It's free of charge, basically. More in detail what the submission looks like. Here's another screenshot from another document on the FDA website. You have the link below. It's a good slide deck that details pre-submissions really well. But and here's some of the content that you typically would see in a pre-submission. Some things that stand out. So detailed device description, and this This is really important if you're working on new and novel devices, novel technologies, because even though FDA sees a lot of new devices, your technology and your device may be new to them, right? So it's really important that you educate the FDA in what your device is, how it operates, what technology is using. And then also to that end, how are you intending this to be used in the field? What is your intended use and your indications for use? And like I said, you submit a bunch of information for them to react to. So for that side of things, you want to have specific questions that then ask where you ask them specific things for you to get feedback as part of your journey to the market. The way that you can get their feedback are a few different ways. You can get it in writing back from them, but you can also meet with FDA, whether virtually or even in person. But for that, you then need also to provide the format for the meeting that you expect. So on a high level, that's what a pre-submission is. Again, as a summary, it's you put together a written submission for them where FDA can then review your plans and your device and then give you insights and early feedback for that. So then on to the why. First off, why does FDA want you to do this? They're the one who put the pre-submission in place, but it's for a good reason. And this is another screenshot from that first guidance document, and I kind of underlined it here because I think it's pretty clear. But their feedback may improve the quality of subsequent submissions. So basically, their early feedback will help you with the 510(k) de novo, whatever it might be. And with that, shorten the total review times, right? So it's going to be faster in general for them to review your submission and also facilitate the development process for new devices. So with them having a chance to chime into what you're doing early on, their insights can then also help guide your final development and associated testing. So in general, they think then the pre-sub program contribute to a more efficient and transparent review process, which it does. So in summary, it makes the review process faster. And on their end, again, of course, they need also to learn about your device. Your device may be completely novel. And then they do want to provide this early feedback to help you have the insights that you need to test your device properly for safety and effectiveness. On your end of this of the table, why should you do it, right? Just talked about why FDA think is a good thing, but for you, why should you do it? Well, it's really important because this is somewhat your handshake with FDA, an early handshake where you have interaction with FDA. You get a chance to get their feedback early on. And this will help you significantly de-risk your regulatory strategy and the pathway to the market, right? And in addition to that, you are going to get a lot of clarification. You are going to have a clear pathway from this is the testing that I'm expected to do, whether it's preclinical or clinical, to then render a clearance or an approval. And if you are a venture-backed startup, a pre-sub is also really good when it comes to de-risking for your investors, because regulatory risk is big in medical device and life sciences in general. But if you then have a pre-submission done, you can then show investors that you've had this early conversation there, that you have outlined the pathway and got sort of this handshake with FDA on your path forward, and then go into that execution. So those are just a few things why you should do it. Generally speaking, you should always do this. It kind of comes into fail early, fail fast, right? Skipping a pre-sub and then go on for 2 years and then later submit a 510(k), you are setting yourself up for a lot of risk with that submission being incomplete, or they then having considerations for testing that you haven't done and you need to go back into that. So in general, you should do it. Then let's talk about when should you do it in the timeline. So here's a visual that is supposed to represent your journey from when you start, you research the early prototyping of your device, and then go into the formal development and the design control of your device all the way to having that device fully developed, right? And this is basically the R and the D in the R&D. And for devices, as you probably know, is quite different, right? Under the research where you iterate quickly on early rough prototypes. That's more the research phase. And when you get into the development phase under design control, that's where all the regulations apply in terms of how you document the testing of your device and things of that nature. So with that in mind, your journey from the R into the D in R&D, somewhere around here, when you get to some level of good understanding of what your device is going to be, the design of the device. But before you really move into the formal development, especially starting the testing of your device. And the reason for that is because before you start your formal development and the testing, you want to have received that feedback from the FDA in terms of what they think about your device and the considerations for that. And that's not only my point. This is again from that QSub guidance document underlined here. FDA has found that feedback is most effective when requested prior to execution of planned testing. So again, this is of course then for you to know what you need to test for. Also, when you should do it, it's also a too early stage to do it, right? You can't do it too early. You need to have enough information around your device, the way it's going to look like and how it's operating. You don't have to have it fully frozen, but you need to have a good understanding of your device. And to that end, your intended use and indication for use, device classification and other things. Because in general, like I said, you are going to submit information to the FDA in terms of what you think your device is and how you plan to bring that to market for them to react on that. Then into the how to do it. Well, ensure that you have someone with expertise by your side when you do this. For instance, Rook, they are helping customers every week with preparing pre-submissions, because there is a risk if you haven't done this before and you try to do it yourself, that using words and how you lay things out, that actually can sort of backfire. So it's important that you have someone by your side that's done this before that can really help you navigate this. So in summary, for MedTech pre-submissions, don't see this as optional. Make sure you do it. It will accelerate your timeline to the market and heavily de-risk what you're doing as you get through the FDA process. And we'll give that confidence in your testing plan and then promote that future marketing submission success, 510K, whatever it might be. And lastly, if you're venture backed, you will de-risk your proposition for your investors. With that, I would like then to hand it over to Jeff to show you a little bit about QuickVault and now our latest module for managing and tracking submissions within that platform. So with that, Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Axel. Share screen here. Okay. So what I'm going to show you today is just really what QuickVault is all about. Demo is going to be in two parts. First, I'm going to just do a quick overview of QuickVault and all the features for those that aren't familiar. And then for the second part, I'll do a deep dive into our new regulatory submissions functionality that'll be coming to QuickVault later this spring. So first off, QuickVault itself, as Axel provided an overview. We provide all the things you'd need in an eQMS, but we provide even more than just that. Inside, you'll have the ability to track your document control, your training, quality events, products, as well as suppliers. If I take a look at each of the individual pieces, maybe starting off with documents here, you can see from our help site, we've got more than 25 different document types and 3 different life cycles, because you know that not all document types are equal. For example, your policies, procedures, you want time for training after they've improved before they become effective, versus other reports where their training isn't required. And then you've got other documents that are executed records that you just want to upload and archive into QuickVault itself. Creating a document is really easy in QuickVault. If I just jump into here, you can see you're creating a document. I can go in, let's say I'm going to create like a sample SOP for today here. I'll pick a document. Let's say this is an SOP. I'll go through, this is for QA. I'll pick a document here. I can pick a document I want to upload. And then you can see the document is uploaded as version 0.1, and I can navigate through the review process for the document itself. I can send it for others to do a review. I can do a formal approval where I do a Part 11 compliant electronic signature. And the other neat things we can do for QuickVault is also be able to connect it with other types of documents, which is really powerful compared to trying to just manage it on your own shared drive. For example, if this SOP is tied to a specific policy, I could link it to a policy and actually have the ability to kind of trace and connect the documents together. I can also tag and categorize my documents as well. Let's say this document is all done and ready to approve. I'll just show you quickly here. You can approve the document. Let's say the document's going to be approved and effective by the end of the month here. All approvers are notified via email. They get a task to jump into QuickVault, and then they can just quickly approve with their electronic signature here. Show you here. And the document is approved. If I were to download a copy of the document, you can see that we automatically generate the headers and footers of the document itself. So I'll jump into this document here, headers, footers, and then we automatically generate the approval page for the document itself as well. At this point, when the document's approved, you can also assign training for individuals who may want to be trained on the document. So let's say I'll assign training here to Axel and then Quinn's user. And then all the trainees, they'd be notified and they can go in and complete their training. Just a quick overview of training. If we zoom out on the top level, you can see training across the entire organization for all the different training assignments, as well as training for all your individual users within your organization. Or if you want to automate a lot of your training, you can use what we call a curricula. So this is taking your training matrix and being able to generate like a plan for all the training assignments. So let's say an onboarding, there's a couple procedures that everyone needs to complete the training on. You create this curricula, you assign individuals, and then they automatically get training. If any of the documents within the curricula get up version, then all the users would also get assigned training for the new training. And if there's any training that happens outside the organization, let's say there's training for instructor-led on-the-job training, you'd be able to access that content right within QuickVault as well. Beyond that, quality events. We have 5 different dedicated processes for quality events. I'll jump in here really quickly here. We've got quality event processes for quality issues, your non-conformance, your CAPAs, change control, effectiveness checks, and complaints. We know that not all these flows are different. They've got different steps, different information that you want to track, and we uniquely have dedicated processes for each of these. If we take a look at a quality issue, for example, this would be your non-conformance. You can see that it's a 3-step process. The opportunity to track when the issue happened, document the issues, upload any attachments, if there's a report, some photos you want to include, do your root cause analysis, your kind of 5 M's for your direct cause, impact level, and then you can include all this information. And just like you saw for documents, you can actually write this for approval where you have Part 11 compliant signatures right within QuickVault. You can also download a copy of our quality events to share with potentially a supplier or with an auditor, so they don't necessarily have to access your system directly to see this content. So you see, for example, you can generate a PDF that you can then share with others. If the quality issue led to a potential CAPA, you can see just looking at a CAPA here, it's a 5-step process instead, different types of fields that we're tracking, and then you can create an individual CAPA plan with tasks assigned to individual users who can all document and put all this content right within QuickVault itself. We've got supplier management within QuickVault. You can actually manage all of your suppliers within QuickVault, track any documents for your individual suppliers. So this would be your assessment, any audits with the suppliers themselves. You can go through the approval process for your suppliers and then provide any contact information. And then switching into our design and development module, we can track everything from your design controls to your risks, doing your risk assessments, tracking your design reviews and your risk reviews. So for example, you can go in, let's say for this particular product, you can document all the different user needs for the documents. You can link them together, creating that traceability matrix for your design controls, so your design user needs, your design inputs, outputs, your DV and V. And then you can also visualize how they all connect together. So seeing how your user needs connect to your inputs, how do they connect to your outputs, and then to your testing as well. And similarly for your risks, you can take this here, you can create your risk, take all your ISO risk categories, go through your hazard analysis, and then for each of your individual risk levels, go through your acceptability. So your severity, probability, 5x5 matrix, your document your risk controls, any residual, including your benefit risk analysis, and you can also tie these back to your design controls as well. At this point, if you've got all your design controls, all your risks, you can then conduct your design reviews right within QuickVault itself. So you can go and work through each of these individual user needs that you work through. You can include any meeting notes, and you can formally approve all your design reviews as well as your risk reviews right within QuickVault. And what's also neat is you can take any of your documents that you've got related besides your design controls and your risk reviews, categorize them, and you can generate essentially your design history file. Also called the design development file in the new QMSR. And you can see you can actually have all this content generated for you, and it would link back into QuickVault if I were to go and click and navigate to the record itself. What's really cool, switching into part 2, is one of the big benefits we see is while you have all this content and you prepare all this content in QuickVault, you got all your design content, all your development content, the natural next step is to move into your regulatory submission. Whether or not this is your pre-submission or actually moving right into your 510K or de novo, having this all together within one system creates a lot of synergy, a lot of additional benefits. So what's coming up in the next release is an additional submissions tab in QuickVault, where you'll be able to track and organize all this content in the same system that you're storing all your design controls and your documents as well. So instead of trying to manage all of this process in your own shared drive or just on your local laptop, you can manage this content, keep things organized, keep the right versions together, all within a system itself. For example, if we were tracking our 510K, you can create a brand new submission here, and then you can see that, hey, here are all the chapters that correspond to my eStar submission. I can go through, I can organize all my content and then track the individual sections one at a time. So diving into, let's say, the device description, working through individual sections, I can assign users. Perhaps I'm not the only one working on it. I have Axel and Kyle, they're also working on it. I can assign out the different sections. I can include my content, link it to documents that are already in QuickVault itself, and then mark each of these individual ones as completed, and work through that full progress one at a time, the individual items. Of course, these are flexible. If there's certain sections that I don't need, then I can delete them. I can add additional sections as well, meaning that while QuickVault will have out-of-the-box templates for your use cases that Kyle had mentioned with the FDA as well as with your CE mark, if there's other formats that you want to deal with, or there's other regulatory bodies that you want to submit to, QuickVault will allow you to manage all that within the one system as well. So you can keep going, you can work through the progress, track all that progress together. Now I'm just kind of fast forward into another one where the complete package is completed. At this point, you can go download the package itself. This would take a zip file and generate like a big folder with all the different attachments that you would store, that you'd already keep a copy of in QuickVault. One of the big benefits here is you're keeping track of the latest version and avoid any issues of using an older stale version of a document itself. Once that's submitted, you can mark the actual record as submitted, complete that, and then you send it over to the health authority, whether it be the FDA or one of your regulatory authorities. After that, the next step would be moving into your interactions. So let's say the FDA comes back with your additional information requests. We can track that right within QuickVault. You'll have your interactions. You'll create the interaction for the additional information request, and then you can go through, you can document and prepare your response. So for each of those questions, it might tie back to a specific section. I can put the question, I can provide my response here, and then I can start adding additional sections for all the responses that I need to make throughout QuickVault. I can track it similarly to my actual submission itself, mark each of these complete, and then I can fill it out and then generate another zip package that's similar to what I would be doing for my submission package. So take all this stuff, putting it into a system itself. And then once you've built that and put that all together, you can always go back and you can see how that ties back together your core submission with any of the questions and answers, creating that full set of traceability within QuickVault itself. So just a quick recap of what we'll be potentially able to do in QuickVault later this spring is I was able to prepare my submission using a document with all my design and development documents as a springboard. I was able to organize and coordinate my submission all in one place. And then I'll be able to manage my health authority interactions in here as well. Ultimately, I think that having a solution with both our quality and regulatory capabilities all in one system will really be valuable across multiple teams, and it'll save you a lot of time and minimize errors as well. I'm really excited about having this feature come out. And so that concludes the demo for QuickVault itself, just an overview, as well as a sneak peek at the new regulatory functionality. At this point, Tory, I'll pass it over to you, and I think we're moving into Q&A.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff, for the live demo, and Axel, Kyle, just wonderful insights throughout the presentation. So thank you all. Okay. So for the attendees that are with us, if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A chat right now. I'm just going to say just a couple of more things, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. So just one final reminder that we will email all registrants the full webinar recording, the slide deck, the session summary, and a recap of the Q&A session within the next 24 hours. So just keep an eye out for an email from us. And then also, if you are interested in learning more about QuickVault software and the new submission functionality that Jeff just went over, go ahead and head over to quickvault.veeva.com/demo, and we will get you set up with a personalized walkthrough. And also, if you need any assistance at all in preparing or submitting a regulatory submission, definitely reach out to the Rook team, and you can contact them by emailing info@rookqs.com. All right. So we have some great questions that have been asked. So thank you to everyone who has been sending those in. Let's go ahead and start with this one. Now, can you guys see that, or should I go ahead and read it off?
Just the first one as far as the pre-sub.
The first one. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I think kind of first one. So first part, if you have a pre-sub and discuss a predicate and agree on testing, then find a later better predicate, can you switch? So yes, you can switch your predicates between your pre-sub, your submission. We've also seen situations where you can switch your predicate during a submission. If you're under review and the AI request prompts you to potentially switch to a different predicate based on the reviewer feedback, that's also an option. So you are open to switching your predicates. In some cases, you can have more than one predicate. Not always recommended, but yeah, you can definitely switch your predicate after a pre-sub or even during an ongoing review. As far as like timing of if you have an initial pre-sub and then want the FDA to agree on another portion of your protocol or additional questions, whether or not you need to wait the 75 to 90 days to get another pre-sub set, it really depends. I would say if you still have ongoing communication, you can email that reviewer directly and see if they will help and respond to your questions or feedback. In some cases, they will, and they'll just answer it directly, and you're able to kind of move forward. In some cases, they'll say, hey, it's probably best if you bundle all this up and submit a new pre-sub, and we have another formal meeting. So I think it really depends on the reviewer and team you're working with, but also how thorough your questions are and how much review they'll need before you can directly answer. I've seen both happen. But obviously, if you do think you'll need another one, starting that process as soon as possible is recommended as well. And I think Axel had made a comment about the 75 to 90 days is the current. I think that is one of the things that will be affected with, less staff, is because these are a free item. We've already seen trends of them pushing companies to a 513G, which is the request for designation, rather than a pre-sub, if it's really like, what class am I? So I think that the pre-sub is another thing that might suffer more as there's reduced staff at FDA.
So people should expect the full time.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kyle. All right, so next up, what's the best way to determine which pathway companies should take to market? For example, 510(k) versus PMA.
Yeah, I think it really is looking through the FDA product codes to determine where your device fits and what's closest to your device. So the FDA has product codes list that identify types of devices and types of technology, what those devices do, and then what classification those are. So class 1, 2, 3, and whether or not a 510(k) is required. So looking through the product codes and device classification on the FDA website to determine what is the best fit for your product. In some cases, there's multiple that are similar. In some cases, there's specific features that might move you from a class 1 to a class 2 or a class 2 to a class 3. So you want to research those features and or options and then see which one fits best with your product and timeline to market and use that to make the best decision. It's also something that our team helps with a lot is just like a high level initial regulatory assessment to review your product, review FDA information, review other products in the market, and give you a pathway or multiple pathways that you can then decide which one works best with, say, your timeline, your budget, all those things.
Thank you. All right, this one is going to be for the QuickVault team. This person asked, how does using a tool like QuickVault change the submission process compared to using spreadsheets?
Yeah, I can take that one. As you saw from the demo, there's going to be a huge gain, just both from an efficiency perspective as well as minimizing errors by having QuickVault be able to manage your registration and your submission. If you think about it, if you're using a spreadsheet, you're using your file documents and file folders, there's so much variability. It's really hard to manage as a group. I've heard just from talking to various folks, just some horror stories of, hey, you actually had your whole submission on someone's laptop and then they left the company and now you've lost like 3 months of work. So there's a lot of risks and a lot of issues that you run into when you're trying to manage this with different types of tools all put together. By building it into QuickVault, we've just heard from talking to a lot of different folks that there's tons of value. Like we already have all that content in QuickVault. You already have all your design documents, all your tests. Why not be able to just get to that next step and have the regulatory one be able to organize a lot of those pieces to generate together? There's going to be a lot of efficiency. You're going to save time, and you're really going to be able to minimize errors. So I'm really excited about being able to introduce the QuickVault, and I think it's going to be a huge leap from managing it versus trying to scrape together a lot of tools together.
What strategies work well for managing both US and EU submissions in parallel?
Yeah, I think I can take an Axel if you have thoughts as well. But I think for this, we typically recommend, having one so building your testing and your design files to align with both. So when you're in development phase, in some cases, you'll go to testing either like biocompatibility or electrical safety, and there's slight differences between the two. So you'll want to make sure you opt in for the testing that meets all of the requirements. So I think Canada, EU, and US might have some slightly different. So in that phase, make sure that your testing aligns with all of the future markets that you plan to enter in the next few years. So that's kind of like the early development and through testing phase is just having the approach that you're going to go to all of these markets. As far as like getting close to the actual submission, it might depend specifically on your type of device, but assuming you have a 510(k) path in the US and a predicate, I would say to move forward with submitting that FDA 510(k) while that is under review in that 6 to 9 month timeline that we talked about, scheduling your ISO audits during that review. So while the FDA is actively reviewing, you can set up your CE mark audits for them to come audit your facility and begin your tech file review while the FDA is reviewing. So if it is the goal to do these in parallel, that's what we've seen has been the most successful. If your product is something like a de novo in the US and doesn't have a clear pathway or predicate device, you might want to start with the EU first because they have a rule-based classification system. So it should be a more straightforward process and less discussion than going through de novo and pre-sub with the US. So that's what we've seen. Submit your 510K, get your audits and tech file done in that 6 to 9 month window, and then hopefully you'll have both around the same time.
Okay. Great. All right. Does QuickVault support MDR from EU as well?
Yeah, so we built QuickVault to be compliant with the most common standards and regulations, including ISO 13485. So the answer is yes. We also have QuickVault is aligned with the new QMSR, meaning the FDA's alignment to ISO 13485. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then this one is for you, Jeff, from Karen Mueller. How do you assure that the ISO required check on regulatory impact of CAP activities are done and documented?
Yeah, so we've got within QuickVault, I had shown you the quality issues. So for non-conformance, we've got the CAPA workflow that you can build out with QuickVault as well. I like to think of it's a combination. QuickVault doesn't solve 100% of your problems. You still have your SOP in terms of your CAPA type of procedures that you need to follow. Instead of using a paper form and filling out a Word document for your CAPA, you can actually manage it through the system itself. So it helps streamline those flows. So it's a combination of letting you use QuickVault as the workflow, but then applying your own procedures to be able to solve that problem. We also don't want to, we have to find that balance, right? Because QuickVault is a system that you just turn on. We don't want to mandate every single thing because your personal business practice might be slightly different. So we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of which steps you want to take. So ultimately, it's a tool that will help move you further, but it doesn't solve you every single thing. You still need to have your own SOPs to make sure that things will work the way you want it to for your organization.
Great, thank you. And then we have one other Veeva QuickVault question. How can FDA access the submission option on QuickVault by Veeva? Do you have to provide them with access to your eQMS?
Yeah, so the idea for that one is think of QuickVault as a way to help as a tool for you to prepare. So you're building all that content, have it all available, and then ultimately there's an export. So you'll be able to generate the zip, generate the content that you do want to send to the FDA, and then you still send it over to them as that zip file. There isn't a electronic submission, right? You still have to go through the portal. You still have to submit it that way. They're not going to QuickVault, but it does all the steps that you would do in a much more streamlined way instead of trying to do it on like SharePoint, for example.
Okay. And then do we integrate with other IT tooling for requirements management, test management, et cetera?
IT tooling. I mean, it depends on the specific use cases. We're integrated with a number of different opportunities. For example, with Okta for single sign-on, we've covered that one. There's a couple other potential integration opportunities we're planning to look at in the future. So I think it really depends on what their needs are, but QuickVault's constantly evolving, right? This release, we're including new functionality for regulatory. As Axel mentioned, later this year, we've got some new functionality for equipment. And there's a lot of things that we're going to be continuing to add in QuickVault. So if there isn't something that you want in QuickVault now, it might be there in another 6 months, 12 months. So we're constantly adding new things to the product itself.
Yeah. We have one more QuickVault question. Can you do technical file compilation within QuickVault as per notified body specific guidance documents?
So one of the unique things that we've done with QuickVault, building out that submission prep, is that you can actually generate whatever you need to be able to do by creating that structure. And the example I showed you for the other piece with design controls is we automatically streamline for the design and development file, but you can take that similar sort of approach for the technical file. We're trying to do a lot of that initial heavy lifting, organizing things together, putting it together, but ultimately it'll be up to you in terms of, hey, how do you want that structure? So making it much easier for you to build it so that we do like 95% of that hard legwork and coordination. And the last little bit is the piece of compiling together at the very end. But hopefully we can simplify your process tremendously by having QuickVault as an opportunity to do that.
Thank you. And then we do have one other question about QuickVault. The first part was answered. Does QuickVault support MDR in Europe? So the answer to that was yes, but does it include relevant templates, or when will those be ready?
Yeah, so for the first release, we're going to be providing templates for both the US market as well as Europe. Those will be both part of our spring release, as well as pre-submissions. So there'll be a lot of templates for you to get started and give you a good running start.
Love it. Okay. Will FDA let you know what class your device is in pre-submission?
You want to take that, Kyle?
Yeah, I was either way. I know you did pre-subs. I think our general advice is that you don't ask open-ended questions. You say, we are this class and this is our predicate. Do you agree? So I think it's general advice from all most regulatory consultants that open-ended questions are not in your advantage. So really you want to have a detailed plan addressing why this is your best class and this is your best predicate, and get them to confirm rather than asking, because that could result in you getting an answer you don't like, or them proposing you do a huge clinical study that you don't have funding for, right? So really having a strategic approach to say, this is what we've researched and what we think is our best path, and go with that type of question and proposal.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That you better set up, if you come to the FDA with a proposal, that's really how they want the pre-submission to do. If you, for whatever reason, have challenges with understanding what device class you belong in and other insights on that side of things, you can do what's referred to as the 513G, and that is the request for designations. And then basically you're asking the FDA to tell you what your device is. So that's a different vehicle that you can do. Just bear in mind that if you then do a 513G, and if you don't like with what they come up with, you kind of stuck with that. So for you to propose something in a pre-submission gives you a little bit more room for sort of negotiation, or at least discussion around your device class and things of that nature. That's it.
Okay, this is our last question. So anyone else who is on the call, if you do have any questions, we have just a couple more minutes. So I'll go ahead and drop those in. But this question is, do I need clinical data for a 510K?
I think I talked about this a little bit during the presentation. So it's not always required. I think certain types of devices need clinical data. So any monitoring devices, if you have a wearable, let's say measuring heart rate or respiration rate, obviously you need to compare those against a person, because there's no clinical model for heart rate or respiration rate. So you actually need to compare against somebody wearing your device and showing it works properly. Same with diagnostic devices. So if you're doing a diagnostic, you need to actually have clinical samples and do a clinical trial. A lot of other types of products that are already well established don't need clinical data that go through 510K. So I would say majority do not, but there are certain types of products that definitely need a clinical testing.
Yeah, and also to add to that, the majority of 510Ks that are cleared in the US, those devices are brought to the market on preclinical data only. And if it hasn't changed recently, I believe the approach by the FDA is that you know, if you can get the data that you need to show safety and effectiveness in preclinical studies, that's preferred, to not put human subjects at risk with investigational devices. So a lot of devices, class 2 devices, are brought to the market on preclinical data only. So come up with good models where you can gather the data to demonstrate that your device is safe and effective for its intended use. And I think that's one of the bigger differences now between the US and Europe, that in the US, still the vast majority of devices do get to market on preclinical data only, whereas in Europe now, most devices, there's a demand for clinical data for most devices there.
Okay, all right, thank you. One last question just came in. can we submit class 3 device through 510K if the device has a predicate?
Yeah, so if it's a class 3, then it'll need a PMA. So unless it's specifically called out, which I don't know any examples, but there might be one. But yeah, if class 3 is a PMA device, so the predicate pathway is not your pathway, you'll have to submit a PMA.
To that end, though, if you have identified devices that you feel are predicates to you, in that case, I would go back and question whether you actually are a class 3 device. You might then be a class 2 device eligible for the 510K pathway. So I would go back and reassess whether you are a class 2 or class 3 if you now have found similar devices that you can use as predicates.
Absolutely. Great tips. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Hope that you enjoyed the webinar and that you feel more equipped to tackle your next regulatory submission. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to follow Rook Quality Systems and QuickVault on LinkedIn so that you can stay up to date on future events. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.